Captain Jake Morrison had experienced better days. His ship, the Wandering Duck, now resembled abstract art more than a functional spacecraft, scattered across half a mile of Kepler 442 billion's crystalline surface. The good news? He was alive. The bad news? He was about to discover why sometimes being dead might be preferable. The aliens who found him looked like oversized praying mantises crossed with accountants. They wore pristine white medical coats that somehow managed to stay spotless, despite dragging his unconscious body through alien terrain. Jake figured that was either impressive hygiene or terrifying efficiency. "Specimen appears to be leaking various fluids," announced Dr. Vex Thorngill, the chief medical officer, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone discussing tax forms. Thorngill had the unfortunate combination of being incredibly tall, incredibly thin, and incredibly convinced of his own intelligence. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit that made conversations feel like strobe light shows. "Should we contain the leakage, Doctor?" squeaked a nurse Pip Blubberton, a shorter, rounder alien whose natural state appeared to be barely controlled panic. Pip's tentacle fingers trembled as he consulted a medical scanner that looked suspiciously like a kitchen appliance. "Negative. We must observe the specimen's natural deterioration patterns first," Thorngill replied, making notes on a tablet with unnecessarily dramatic flourishes. Jake regained consciousness just in time to hear himself being referred to as a specimen. Always a promising start to any medical encounter. He found himself strapped to a table in what looked like the universe's most sterile operating room. Everything was white, smooth, and glowing with that particular alien lighting that made humans look like they were dying of consumption. "Well," Jake said, his voice coming out as a croak, "this is either the cleanest hospital I've ever seen, or the galaxy's most disappointing alien abduction." Both aliens immediately froze. Thorngill's 4 eyes went wide in what Jake assumed was surprise, though with alien facial expressions, it could have been constipation. "The specimen vocalizes," Thorngill whispered, as if Jake had just performed a miracle instead of basic speech. "Is that normal?" Pip asked, consulting his scanner with increasing desperation. "Nothing about this creature appears normal," Nurse Blubberton. Jake tried to sit up, but the restraints held firm. "Look, guys, I appreciate the medical attention, but I'm feeling fine. Just need a few bandages and maybe directions to the nearest repair shop." That's when Jake yawned. A perfectly ordinary, run-of-the-mill human yawn. The kind you'd do in any boring meeting or early morning commute. To Jake, it was nothing. To the aliens, it was apparently the opening sequence of the apocalypse. Pip shrieked and dove behind a medical console. Thorngill stumbled backward, his 4 eyes now blinking in panicked synchronization. "Emergency Protocol 7. Thorngill shouted. "The specimen is experiencing catastrophic jaw displacement. Should I prepare the emergency bone realignment surgery?" Pip called from his hiding spot. "Negative. We don't know if the displacement is contagious." Jake stared at them, his mouth still slightly open from the yawn. Seriously? It was just a yawn. "It's attempting communication during its malfunction," Thorngill observed, making rapid notes. "Fascinating. The vocal cords continue functioning even as the jaw structure fails." This was going to be a long day. Commander Zara Stormwind entered the medical bay with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she could probably bench press a small spacecraft. She was built like a blue-skinned Amazon with extra arms and the personality of a drill sergeant who'd skipped breakfast. "Report, Doctor," she commanded, her voice carrying enough authority to make furniture stand at attention. "We have a primitive humanoid, Commander, possibly the most medically unstable creature I've encountered in 30 years of practice," Thorngill reported with the grim satisfaction of someone who enjoyed being the bearer of terrible news. Stormwind examined Jake with the expression of someone evaluating a particularly disappointing used car. "Doesn't look like much. Earth humans, correct? I thought they were supposed to be durable." "Common misconception, Commander. This specimen appears to be in constant system failure." Jake decided to interject before this conversation took an even worse turn. "Hey, I'm right here and I'm perfectly healthy. Thank you very much." Note the creature's delusional state, Thorngill told Stormwind. It believes itself to be functioning normally despite obvious system malfunctions. Pip emerged from behind his console, having apparently worked up the courage to approach the terrifying human. Doctor, should we begin the comprehensive systems analysis? Proceed, nurse, but maintain safe distance. We don't know the extent of its mechanical failures. What followed was the most absurd medical examination in galactic history. Pip approached Jake like he was a live bomb, wielding a device that looked like a hairdryer crossed with a telescope. The scanner made electronic beeping sounds that seemed to distress the aliens greatly. His central fluid pump is operating at irregular intervals, Pip announced with the tone of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. That's called a heartbeat, Jake said. It's supposed to do that. 68 beats per minute, Thorngill recorded grimly. Highly erratic. Actually, that's pretty normal for a resting heart rate. And look at this respiratory dysfunction, Pip added, pointing his scanner at Jake's chest. The thoracic cavity expands and contracts continuously. I've never seen such persistent mechanical failure. That's breathing, you walking thermometer. But the aliens were too absorbed in their medical drama to listen. Stormwind watched the proceedings with growing irritation. Doctor, how long until this creature expires? She asked with the casual tone of someone asking about the weather. Difficult to determine, Commander. Its systems are so fundamentally compromised that it's remarkable it functions at all. Jake blinked, which caused Pip to nearly drop his scanner. Optical sensors are malfunctioning too. Pip squeaked. They keep shutting on and off. That's blinking. I need to blink to keep my eyes moist. The creature claims its optical failures are intentional, Thorngill noted. Advanced dementia, clearly. Stormwind rubbed what Jake assumed was her forehead with two of her four hands. How did these humans ever make it off their planet if they're this defective? Unknown, Commander. Perhaps they reproduce so rapidly that survival becomes a numbers game. Jake was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. These aliens were so obsessed with perfection and sterility that normal biological functions looked like catastrophic system failures to them. They probably thought hiccups were seizures and scratching was self-destructive behavior. Look, Jake said, trying to inject some rationality into the situation. I know I might seem weird to you, but humans are supposed to work this way. We're organic, not mechanical. The specimen continues to insist its malfunctions are normal, Thorngill observed. It's textbook denial response to terminal system failure. And that's when Jake felt it. That familiar tickle in his nose. That slightly congested feeling that meant only one thing. He was about to sneeze. Jake's nose began to twitch, and he realized with growing horror that he was about to introduce these germophobic aliens to one of humanity's most explosive biological functions. He tried to suppress it, pressing his lips together and thinking calming thoughts about anything other than the increasingly insistent tickle building in his nasal passages. Unfortunately, trying not to sneeze is like trying not to think about elephants after someone mentions elephants. The more you try, the more your brain fixates on exactly what you're trying to avoid. The specimen's optical sensors are beginning to leak, Pip observed with scientific fascination and personal terror. Jake's eyes had started watering as the sneeze built momentum. It's fine, he said through gritted teeth, his voice slightly nasal. Just a little irritation. Fluid discharge from the optical sensors indicates severe system compromise, Thorngill noted, his four eyes blinking rapidly with excitement. Nurse, begin emergency ocular stabilization procedures. No, that's really not necessary, Jake protested, but his voice came out strained as he fought the biological imperative building in his sinuses. Pip began frantically consulting his medical database, which appeared to be a glowing tablet covered in alien hieroglyphs and flashing warning symbols. Doctor, I'm not finding any reference to optical fluid discharge in humanoid species, Pip reported, his tentacle fingers trembling with increasing agitation. That's because humans are clearly a poorly designed species, Stormwind interjected. Probably held together with wishful thinking and primitive medicine. Jake's nose was now twitching visibly, and his breathing had become irregular as he tried to control the impending explosion. To the aliens, this looked like the final stages of a catastrophic system shutdown. The specimen's respiratory intake has become erratic, Thorngill observed with the clinical detachment of someone watching a fascinating car crash. Combined with the optical leakage and nasal appendage spasms, I believe we're witnessing a complete biological cascade failure. Should I alert the hazmat team? Pip asked, backing away from Jake's examination table. Not yet, nurse. We must document this process for science. Jake wanted to explain that he was just trying not to sneeze, but he couldn't risk opening his mouth. He had a feeling that trying to explain the concept of sneezing to these aliens would be like explaining quantum physics to a particularly nervous goldfish. His eyes were now streaming tears, his nose was twitching like a rabbit's, and his breathing had become a series of short, sharp inhalations as his body prepared for the inevitable release. The creature appears to be entering some sort of pre-detonation sequence, Stormwind observed with professional interest. How fascinating that such primitive organisms have explosive capabilities. Should we evacuate the medical bay? Pip whispered, clutching his scanner like a security blanket. Negative. We must observe the complete process. For science. Oh, science. Jake realized that his situation had moved beyond awkward into the realm of potentially life-threatening. These aliens clearly had no understanding of basic human biology, and they were interpreting his perfectly normal bodily functions as signs of imminent death or explosion. The sneeze was now inevitable. Jake could feel it building like a storm system, gathering pressure and momentum, despite his best efforts to contain it. His whole face felt tight, his eyes were streaming, and his nose was doing a dance that would have made a professional twitcher jealous. The nasal appendage spasms are increasing in frequency, Thorngill noted with scientific enthusiasm. I believe detonation is imminent. Perhaps we should take cover, Pip suggested, edging toward the door. Nonsense, nurse. We are medical professionals. We must observe and document. Jake made one last desperate attempt to explain, but the only sound that came out was a strangled ah, 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 which the aliens interpreted as his final death throes. It's trying to communicate its last words, Thorngill whispered reverently. How tragically primitive. The sneeze had reached critical mass. Jake's entire respiratory system was now committed to the process, and no amount of willpower was going to stop what came next. Achoo. Manu. The sneeze that erupted from Jake Morrison was, by human standards, perfectly ordinary. Maybe a 6 out of 10 on the Richter scale of nasal explosions. He'd definitely done bigger ones during allergy season. By alien standards, Jake had apparently just detonated a biological weapon of mass destruction. The sound echoed through the pristine medical bay like a thunderclap in a library. For a moment, complete silence followed, as if the universe itself was processing what had just occurred. Then all hell broke loose. Pip screamed and dove under a medical console. Thorngill stumbled backward, his 4 eyes wide with terror, all blinking in panicked synchronization. Stormwind immediately drew what looked like a high-tech weapon and pointed it at Jake. Biological Contamination Protocol Alpha. Thorngill shouted at the top of his lungs, which was impressive considering he apparently had at least 3 sets of vocal cords. Red lights began flashing throughout the medical bay. Sirens wailed with the kind of ear-splitting intensity usually reserved for nuclear meltdowns or alien invasions, which Jake realized was probably exactly what they thought was happening. The specimen has exploded. Pip wailed from his hiding spot. We're all going to die. Containment breach. Containment breach, blared an automated voice from hidden speakers. All personnel evacuate Medical Bay 7 immediately. Jake sat on his examination table, post-sneeze and feeling much better, watching the chaos unfold around him with the detached fascination of someone observing a particularly elaborate performance art piece. Guys, he tried to say, but his voice was drowned out by the continued wailing of sirens and alien panic. Armored figures began pouring into the medical bay. They looked like a cross between stormtroopers and extermination experts. wearing full-body hazmat suits and carrying equipment that seemed designed for containing everything from toxic spills to interdimensional rifts. "Hazmat Team 7 reporting," announced their leader, his voice mechanically distorted through his suit's communication system. "What's the nature of the biological incident?" "The primitive humanoid has experienced catastrophic system failure," Thorngill reported, trying to maintain his professional composure while backing away from Jake's table. "There was a violent expulsion of unknown biological materials, accompanied by what I can only describe as an explosion of sound." "Understood. Initiating full containment protocols." The hazmat team began setting up what looked like a transparent bubble around Jake's examination table. Other team members started scanning the air with devices that beeped ominously and flashed red lights with increasing urgency. Wait, Jake said, finally finding his voice as the situation spiraled completely out of control. "I just sneezed. It's a normal human function." "The specimen claims its explosive malfunction is normal," Thorngill reported to the hazmat team leader. "Advanced delusional state, clearly noted. Specimen exhibits cognitive dissociation from reality." Jake watched in growing disbelief as the hazmat team completed their containment bubble. He was now sitting inside what looked like a transparent tent, breathing filtered air and being observed by a dozen aliens who apparently thought he was one sneeze away from destroying the space station. "Look," Jake said, his voice slightly muffled by the containment field, "sneezing is something humans do when their nasal passages are irritated. It's not an explosion, it's not dangerous, and it's definitely not contagious." "The specimen continues to insist its biological weapon discharge was harmless," one of the hazmat team members reported. "Biological weapon?" The team leader's voice crackled with alarm. "This is now a code red situation." "Oh, for crying out loud," Jake muttered. The medical bay erupted into even greater chaos as additional personnel flooded in. Jake could see aliens in various uniforms rushing around, consulting tablets, shouting orders, and generally behaving like his sneeze had just started an intergalactic war. Through the chaos, Jake caught sight of Commander Stormwind still standing near his containment bubble. Her weapon still drawn, but her expression shifting from alarm to something that might have been thoughtfulness. "Commander," Jake called out, hoping to find at least one rational being in this asylum. "You seem like a reasonable person. Can you please explain to everyone that I'm not a biological weapon? I'm just a guy who crashed his ship and needs some basic medical attention." Stormwind studied him with her 4 eyes, her expression unreadable. "You claim this explosion is normal for your species?" "Yes, completely normal. All humans sneeze. It's how we clear irritants from our nasal passages." "And this function serves a biological purpose?" "Exactly. It's actually a sign that my immune system is working properly." For a moment, Jake thought he might be getting through to her. Then Thorngill's voice cut through the din. "Commander, I strongly recommend we prepare for emergency surgical intervention. The creature's biological systems are clearly malfunctioning at a fundamental level." And Jake realized his situation had just gotten significantly worse. Commander Stormwind holstered her weapon and stepped closer to Jake's containment bubble, her expression shifting from alarm to the kind of grim determination usually reserved for impossible military missions. "Dr. Thorngill," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a laser through butter, "what are your recommendations for dealing with this biological hazard?" Jake felt his stomach drop. Being called a biological hazard was never a good sign, especially when surrounded by aliens who apparently thought sneezing was equivalent to setting off a bomb. "Given the severity of the specimen system failures, I recommend immediate quarantine followed by emergency corrective surgery," Thorngill reported with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting his entire career for such an interesting medical challenge. "Surgery?" Jake asked, his voice rising an octave. "What kind of surgery?" "We'll need to repair your catastrophically malfunctioning respiratory system," Thorngill explained with the patient tone of someone talking to a child. "The explosive discharge mechanism you just demonstrated could be fatal if left untreated. It's not a malfunction. It's how humans are supposed to work." The specimen's continued denial is consistent with advanced neurological deterioration, Thorngill observed. We may need to address cognitive functions as well. Jake watched in horror as Nurse Pip began wheeling over a cart loaded with surgical instruments that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never seen human anatomy, but had read a very confusing description of it secondhand. Commander, Jake said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice, I need you to listen to me. I'm not sick. I'm not malfunctioning. I'm a normal, healthy human being. What you just witnessed was a sneeze. It's something every human does multiple times per day. Multiple times per day? Stormwind repeated, her 4 eyes narrowing. Yes, sometimes more if we're around dust or pollen or other irritants. You're telling me that your species regularly experiences these explosive biological events? They're not explosive. They're just forceful exhalations designed to clear the nasal passages. Stormwind turned to Thorngill. Doctor, if this creature's claims are accurate, then its entire species is potentially unstable. Highly unlikely, Commander. No intelligent species would evolve such dangerous biological functions. Hey, Jake protested. Humans are plenty intelligent. We built spaceships, developed medicine, created art and literature. And yet you claim to routinely explode through your facial orifices, Thorngill countered. The contradiction is obvious. Jake realized he was trapped in the galaxy's most absurd catch-22. The more he insisted that sneezing was normal, the more convinced the aliens became that humans were dangerously unstable. And the more they thought he was unstable, the more determined they became to fix him with what would undoubtedly be lethal alien surgery. Commander, Thorngill continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering important strategic intelligence, if this specimen's claims are true. Then humans could use these biological explosions as weapons. A single human in a confined space could potentially incapacitate multiple personnel with these sneezes. Jake watched Stormwind's expression shift from concern to tactical assessment. Are you suggesting that this human's presence here is an act of biological warfare? It's possible, Commander. The timing is suspicious. A human ship crashes on our planet, and within hours we're dealing with biological contamination events. I crashed because my navigation system malfunctioned, Jake shouted. Not because I was planning to weaponize my sinuses. The specimen grows increasingly agitated, Pip observed from behind his medical cart. Should I prepare sedatives? Negative, Stormwind said, her voice taking on the crisp authority of someone making important command decisions. If this creature is a biological weapon, we need to understand its full capabilities before we can neutralize the threat. Jake stared at her in disbelief. Neutralize the threat? I'm not a threat. I'm just a pilot who needs his ship fixed. Doctor, how quickly can you perform the corrective surgery? Stormwind asked. We could begin immediately, Commander. Though I should warn you, given the primitive nature of the specimen's biology, survival rates for such extensive system repairs would be optimistic. Optimistic? Jake repeated weakly. Perhaps 30%, Thorngill admitted. 40 if we're very careful. Jake realized that his situation had moved beyond absurd into genuinely life-threatening territory. These well-meaning aliens were about to kill him with kindness and a complete misunderstanding of human biology. He needed to take control of the situation before they managed to surgery him to death. Jake made a decision that would either save his life or convince the aliens he was definitely a biological weapon. He was going to deliberately trigger another sneeze. Commander Stormwind, he said, trying to project as much authority as possible while trapped in a containment bubble. Before you let Dr. Thorngill turn me into an alien science experiment, I want to prove something to you. You're hardly in a position to make demands, specimen. Just give me 2 minutes. If I can demonstrate that sneezing is a normal, controllable human function, will you at least consider that maybe your medical team is overthinking this? Stormwind exchanged glances with Thorngill, who was practically vibrating with scientific excitement at the prospect of performing surgery on an unknown species. 1 minute, she said finally. But if you have another one of those episodes, we're proceeding with immediate surgical intervention. Jake nodded and began looking around the medical bay for something that might trigger a sneeze. Fortunately, the alien's obsession with sterility worked in his favor. The air filtration system was clearly working overtime, and he could see particles of something floating in the bright medical lighting. He took a deep breath through his nose, pulling air and particles as deep into his nasal passages as possible. Then he looked directly up at the brightest light in the room and held his gaze there. "What is the specimen doing?" Pip whispered nervously. "Unknown," Thorngill replied. "Possibly entering another pre-detonation sequence." Jake felt the familiar tickle beginning to build. He concentrated on it, welcoming it instead of fighting it. His eyes began to water, his nose started to twitch, and his breathing became that telltale pattern of short, sharp inhalations. "Here we go again," he announced. "Watch carefully. This is a normal human sneeze, performed on command." "On command?" Stormwind asked, her voice sharp with interest. Ah. Jake let the sneeze build naturally, making sure every alien in the room could observe the process. "It's doing the same sequence as before," Thorngill observed, his scientific fascination warring with his medical alarm. "Achoo. Nay." The second sneeze was, if anything, more spectacular than the first. Jake made no attempt to suppress it, and the sound echoed through the medical bay like a gunshot. But this time, instead of chaos, there was silence. The aliens stared at Jake with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning realization. "You did that intentionally?" Stormwind asked slowly. "Yep," looked at a bright light, inhaled some dust particles, and triggered a perfectly normal human biological response. No system failure, no malfunction, no biological weapon. Just a sneeze. Thorngill's 4 eyes blinked in rapid sequence as he processed this information. But the explosive force, the sound, is completely normal for a sneeze. Some humans sneeze louder, some quieter. Some sneeze once, some sneeze in clusters. It's all normal variation. Pip emerged from behind his medical cart, looking like someone who just discovered that the monster under the bed was actually a slightly noisy house cat. "So you're not dying?" he asked hopefully. "Nope, perfectly healthy. Well, except for the crash landing part." Commander Stormwind studied Jake for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to the hazmat team leader. "Stand down, containment protocols," she ordered. "The biological incident appears to be misunderstood." "Confirmed, Commander." "Standing down." As the hazmat team began dismantling the containment bubble, Thorngill approached Jake's examination table with something that might have been embarrassment, if aliens were capable of such emotions. "So," the doctor said slowly, "this sneezing function serves a legitimate biological purpose?" "Yep, clears irritants, prevents infections, keeps the respiratory system healthy. It's actually a sign that my immune system is working properly." "And all humans possess this capability?" "Every single one. Men, women, children, elderly people. We all sneeze." Thorngill made rapid notes on his tablet, muttering things like remarkable and completely illogical, but apparently functional. Stormwind stepped closer as the containment field finally deactivated. "Morrison," she said, using his name for the first time, "I owe you an apology. We may have overreacted." "May have?" Jake asked with a grin. "Fine. We definitely overreacted. Your species is apparently more resilient than our medical databases indicated." "We're tough to kill," Jake agreed. "Evolution on Earth wasn't exactly gentle." "Indeed. Dr. Thorngill, what's the status on repairing this human spacecraft?" "I'll contact engineering immediately, Commander. I suspect Mr. Morrison is eager to return to space." "Actually," Jake said, stretching as he finally sat up on the examination table, "I'd like to stick around for a day or two if that's okay. I'm curious to learn more about your medical practices. Might be useful for future human-alien relations." "As long as you warn us before you sneeze," Pip said nervously. Deal. Though I should probably mention that humans also hiccup, cough, yawn, burp, and occasionally make other involuntary noises. The look of horror that crossed Thorngill's face was absolutely priceless. Perhaps, Stormwind said diplomatically, we should schedule some educational sessions about human biology before any more of your species visit our station. Good idea, Jake agreed, though you might want to start with the basics. Like the fact that we're supposed to leak fluids from our eyes when we're sad, and that we actually shed our entire outer skin layer every few weeks. Pip fainted. As medical personnel rushed to revive the unconscious nurse, Jake Morrison reflected that while this hadn't been the worst first contact scenario in galactic history, it had certainly been one of the most ridiculous. He made a mental note to include a detailed biology primer in all future human diplomatic missions. After all, the galaxy was a big place, and apparently full of aliens who had never learned that sometimes, when your nose tickles, the only reasonable response is to let it explode.